Welcome to another Miva Masterclass Developer Series. If you're new to the series, this is a developer series that we record a new episode every month that is designed to help Miva developers take a deep dive into essential development tools, workflows, and best practices. Each episode will focus on a specific topic, complete with live demonstrations, a deep dive into real-world examples, and insights from our internal development team. Today's session is called Flex Components Demystified. And whether you're brand new to Page Builder or you've been working in Miva for a while, this session is going to give you a solid foundation in Flex Components, the way they work, why they matter, and how you can start using them in your development workflow. Let's take a quick look at the agenda. So we'll have an introduction to Page Builder Flex Components, then dive into what it takes to create and customize the Flex component. We'll discuss integrating Flex components with Miva MMX Framework and how the upcoming theme editor will play a role in Flex components. Finally, we'll go into a live demo and QA. So we have a lot to talk about, like I said. So let's start off with a simple question. What is a Flex component? At a high level, a Flex component is a modular, reusable block of content that you can drop into Miva's Page Builder interface, but it's much more than just a content block. Under the hood, each Flex component is a self-contained unit of functionality. It can be as simple as a styled banner with editable text, or as complex as a product carousel pulling dynamic data and then using JavaScript to handle some of the interactions. Think of it like building your own custom component library for store owners and content teams, a toolkit of branded interactive features that are easy to reuse and configure. Miva's Page Builder was designed to empower non-technical users to manage their page layout visually. They could add components, configure some options, and then go live. But for developers, we often want a lot more control than that. We want to build things once and then reuse them across multiple pages. We want to lock in styles and layout logic while still exposing some flexibility for content managers. And we want to make sure that we build performance optimized and easy to maintain over time components. And that's what Flex components are designed to solve. So let's take a look at the anatomy of a Flex component. Every Flex component will be made up of 5 core parts. You can see right here. First, you have the flex.json file. This is the heart of the component's configuration fields. It defines the fields that show up in Page Builder when someone selects the component to add to the page. So for example, you might define a field for a heading or an image or a call to action button or even a background color. And these properties aren't just static. They can use things like toggles, selects, media pickers, and a bunch more. You can also set default values, descriptions, and even conditionally show certain properties based off of other property values. The flex.json file is what makes your component flexible, hence the name. Next is the JavaScript file. So this is where you define any interactive behaviors, DOM manipulation, or initialization logic. So for example, let's say you're building a tabbed content block, or you want a component to auto-rotate through featured products. That behavior would be handled within the JavaScript. The nice thing about this is that your JavaScript can be scoped to your component using HTML web component functionality. So you're not at risk at breaking other global scripts or things on the page. Then we have the CSS file. Styling is handled just like in any front-end component model. You keep styles modular and focused. So this means your component can look exactly how you want it without worrying about interfering with other parts of the page. Miva also supports scoped CSS, and you can use modern techniques like CSS variables for theming, especially when you start layering in the MMX framework, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The initialization template, which is the next little section down here, is where things really get powerful. So this is the template that runs once per page load. Even if the component appears multiple times within the page builder UI, this typically is where you want to pull in shared logic. So maybe a product list or a styling of the component. A common example, if you're displaying a grid of featured categories, you want to pull in some styling once for all of those components. So this is where that would happen. And finally, you have the instance template. This is rendered every time your component is placed on a page. This is where you bind your data to the layout, render the entities, and handle any conditional logic based off page builder settings from the flex file that you created. The settings values are added to this template using the l.settings::instance structure. We'll talk about a lot more when we get into those templates. You can also include an image that will display when the user is using the little preview component option. But just to recap, every Flex component includes a flex.json file for user-facing configuration options, JavaScript for any interactivity, CSS for component level styling, initialization template for a once per page logic rendering, and then an instant template for layout and rendering the template. When you combine all of those things, you're creating a flexible unit of content and logic that integrates with Page Builder UI and works across the entire store. Once you've built a couple of components, you'll start to realize really how powerful the model is. You can build branded library of components, things like testimonials, feature blocks, promos, carousels. Your team can reuse them across product pages, category landing pages, you name it. I've also seen developers create scripts to generate the default files and then the settings and values for to create a component to expedite the development of it. The possibilities are really endless. We're going to actually create a component in a live demo. But first, let's walk through all the aspects of what would be needed to create a Flex component. To start from the beginning, you can start by creating a new component folder in a page builder project. A common convention is to name the folder after your component. So our default components are MMX dash. You can have your agency name before it, your name before it, or whatever it may be, and then whatever the feature is. That's a good naming convention. Just make sure it's descriptive. From there, a clean and scalable way to organize your component is how we do it within our MMX components, is that you have the flex.json file in the root level, and then you group your assets inside a SRC or source directory, right? So inside the source folder, you can create a separate you can separate the additional files. So you'll have a CSS directory, JS template. Within those, you can have your component CSS and your component JavaScript. You'll be using init.mbt for your initialization template and instance.mbt for your instance template. These names can't be changed, but you can have whatever name you want for your CSS and for your JavaScript. This just keeps everything modular and easy to navigate, right? Especially as your library of components grow. You can see, like I said, you can see how this works within our GitHub repo, where we've got a bunch of examples and everything like that. All right, so the next step is to define your components configuration within your flex.json. So let's take a deeper look into how this kind of works. This file defines the user editable settings that will appear in the page builder UI when someone adds your component to a page. At the top level, the flex.json includes some basic required metadata, right, about the component. You have your default code, name, and version, which are all pretty self-explanatory. Then you have type, which lets Miva know if it is a component or a library type. A component can be used in the page builder UI, and a library will not be exposed in the page builder UI. It's mainly used to support scripts or styling capabilities, like our MMX base one is a library component, library flex component. We also have a category, which is used to categorize the component in Page Builder and determines which icon shows up next to the component's name. The values you can see are here. They're already pre-configured. Finally, we have managed, a setting which indicates whether the component can be updated externally using MMT or through the admin. All of the Miva native components are set to true. This is so Miva can update our components without worrying about having to overwrite any custom code that's created. The next section of the flex.json includes references to the paths of the initialization template, the instant template, any scripts, and any styles that you have. You can see how that looks here. Also included in that section, so within the scripts, there's a styles object that allows you to define any HTML attributes for each of the files. But also included in this section is the resource group code. So this defines the code of the resource group that will be created and assigned to each resource within the scripts and the styles object when the flex component is imported into Miva. All right. Before we get into really what the nuts and bolts of the flex component, the flex.json file is, we're going to take a look at some recent additions that became available in the settings. So in version 10.10, Miva introduced a couple new features in regards to flex components. The first is the ability to preview data within Page Builder using the sample data types property in your flex component. Page Builder will review the items assigned to the page and then display some fields there automatically if this is in the configuration. For example, assigning products to a page that displays the product code lookup, or assigning category items that displays the category code lookup. Additionally, it can be set up like you see in this example here, which is from the product list component. This definition takes the value of the product set property, which we'll talk about in a second, and has it choose that item to choose from. So if someone goes in and selects the category item, it's going to search through that for the sample data types. We also introduced the Page Builder Inspector. When active, it will highlight the editable section that you've selected. So this introduced a new property called Preview Component Selector property, which contains a tokenized selector that will map to a single element in the DOM for the flex component that's rendered. The selector is utilized by query selector, so anything available within the scope is acceptable. You can see here's an example, this first line up here, that we have on all of the native components. The native Miva components all include a data flex component and data flex item as HTML attributes within the instance.nbt template. And then with the available tokens, it gets the correct value to highlight. So here's a list of all the available tokens. These tokens can be used within conditional logic properties as well to display a specific value based on what's selected. Moving right along. Finally, we have what really gives the component all the flexibility. You can have what we call properties. And so properties are things like color, text area, selector, etc. These all can be found on the developer docs under the Flex Component Properties section. Each property you define here becomes editable. I mean, each of the properties come an editable option in Page Builder, and the value gets passed into the template dynamically. So I can't say that word. Each properties array is made up of the following: a code, prompt, required, and type. Then some property types like select use options. You can even use the visibility conditions setting to show the property based off of another values property, like I was mentioning before. All these examples you can see within our Flex components as well. But also there's advanced properties like groups and lists and fragment types if you need even more control of how these things list and lay out within Page Builder. After properties, you have default setting. This setting will allow you to set predefined values for those properties that you selected. The defaults use the property code as a reference. You can see here where it's got the property code and the property is right there. And finally, you have the advanced properties, which accept all the same values as the property setting. They just display in the advanced tab within Page Builder. It is mainly used for controls that may not need to be used that much. This example is something that is in all of our components. All right. Now, since we have a good understanding of how to set up the properties and the flex.json file, the next thing to understand is the instance template. This is where you output the values that come from your component's layout. So the instance template is where the component is actually rendered to the page. When Miva renders the flex component, it passes all of the component's data into an array called l.settings::instance. This includes values from your properties, advanced, defaults, and then values passed in from when it's being configured on the page. Inside your instance.mvt file, you can reference those values. Let's look at an example instance template for the promo banner component. So here's the flex.json file that we're using just for context, just as far as what would render. In the template, we'll use these codes, heading and description, to pull in the value. So you can see here we've got our MVTE instance heading value, MVTE instance description value. Each value is accessed by its code through the l.settings instance. Let's say we want to conditionally show the button only if the CTA text and CTA link were provided. So you would just include a MVT conditional, if conditional statement, and here's your l.settings instance value for your CTA text and for a URL for your CTA link. Adding a condition like this would help prevent blank or broken elements on the page if the user didn't configure everything in the fields, right? You'll notice, like I just said, there's the URL property uses a URL and in the structure, and the text and text area are using the value. Using in the GitHub repository, we have our Flex component schema hints for VS Code. If you're using that in VS Code, it can give you kind of how this stuff will be outputted and have it easier to expedite your development process. And then those advanced properties we talked about, like spacing or padding, those are all part of the instance arrays as well, but they're just nested. So you can access them like here. So if you had a spacing top, it would be instance advanced spacing top value. All right, my little cursor there says we're halfway along, and we are just about there. So that is good. Let's move on to CSS styling in JavaScript. So now we have a good understanding of how the instance template works. Let's bring that component to life by applying styling, and then you can even do JavaScript if you'd like. Every Flex component can support its own CSS file. In your flex.json, we saw that you can link the file under the styles array, so it gets included when the component is loaded. Um, we'll talk about this more, but if your component uses MMX web components, or you want to build for a broader design consistency, consider using CSS variables defined in MMX base. For example, if you could set your button color to use the theme variable of -- color primary, this way, when your store's designs change, your components will adapt automatically. The style sheet can be scoped to the component as well using HTML web components. So you don't need to worry about affecting other components on the page. If you are not using HTML web components, it is best practice to namespace your classes to avoid any accidental collisions. And then to add additional behavior to your component, like HTML web component functionality, you can use JavaScript. Not all components need JavaScript, but for anything interactive, like tabbed interface, an accordion, or a slider, you would add that to your JavaScript file, and then you would add that to your JavaScript file in your flex.json. Here is an example of how, if you were using the MMX base, you could use the how we extend the HTML element and create web components. This example is in the GitHub repository as well under example web component. All right, let us move on to the initialization template, or the init.mdt. While your instance template is rendered every time your component is added to a page, the initialization template is only rendered once per page. No matter how many times the component appears on the page, it is just rendered one time. This makes it ideal for handling shared logic, global data, or anything you want to load once per page. So a few examples is like setting up the layout utilities, such as theme specific styling, injecting shared data, loading global Miva variables into your component scope, or creating shared conditional logic, like checking for a customer group or something like that. For example, let's say your component shows a list of featured categories. Instead of running the function a bunch of different times in the component's instance template, you can pull the list in once in the initialization template. This way, it's more efficient than fetching the same data every single time the component renders in the instance template. So those are the main components of a Flex component. You define your settings in flex.json. You build your layout in the instance template. You style it with scoped CSS and interactivity with JavaScript. And then you include shared data, styling, and JavaScript via the initialization template. Let's take it a bit further now and talk about how you can integrate with the MMX framework. Before we dive into how we would do that, let's take a step back and answer why we would even use a framework when building components. First is consistency in design and behavior. Frameworks help ensure your components follow a unified visual and structural language. So if every developer builds from scratch with no guidelines, the result is inconsistent, components don't match, layouts break, and the UX suffers. Another one is faster development. So with a framework, you're not reinventing the wheel. You can build new components faster using predefined layout structures, tokens, utility classes, and base elements. Finally, you have maintainability and scale. All right, a framework like MMX provides shared conventions that make code easier to read, extend, and it's supported long term. So, what is MMX? MMX is Miva's web component framework. It powers the native components that are already seen in Page Builder. It's very similar to lit.dev HTML web component library, a lightweight system built on HTML web components with full shadow DOM support, scope styling, and accessibility baked in. MMX provides a growing library of base elements and utility classes that you can use to build your own Flex components faster and more reliably. The MMX framework uses HTML web components. A good analogy for an HTML web component, for those of you who aren't too familiar with it, is thinking of building a website, like building something with Legos. You start off with a big bucket of Lego blocks. There's square bricks, flat bricks, there's wheels. You use them to build more complex structures like houses and vehicles and giant towers and dragons. Now, imagine instead of building everything from scratch every single time, you had custom pre-built Legos, like a door that already had hinges and a frame, or a working window that opens and closes, or a car chassis with wheels that are already attached to it and everything. These custom blocks would be reusable. You'd be able to use them for just about anything. They'd be encapsulated. So like they have their own shape and they have their own behavior and they're interchangeable. They could snap right into place into anywhere, just in like a regular block. And that's what an HTML web component is. In the HTML web component spec, every custom element has a built-in lifecycle callbacks, things like connected callback, disconnected callback, and attribute change callback. The framework wraps these in an easy-to-use hooks, so you can register inside your component's JavaScript logic. So if you wanted to create your own HTML web component, you would use the native HTML element with the shadow DOM and enhance it using the MMX helper functions. Using MMX is as easy as including the MMX-based JavaScript and or CSS in your initialization template. Once you load that file, some of those helper functions available are things like you see here, MMX create element, which will create the DOM elements dynamically. You can apply attributes and inline styles. You can render template strings. You can normalize data using things like MMX is truthy. You can even call Miva's runtime JSON API functions using the runtime JSON API call function. This is an example of how you can use that API function within there if you're using the MMX-based framework. Okay, so now since we understand kind of what that is and how that works, let's take another step back and take a look at the MMX Customization CSS resource. So this is a resource that's included in all of the MMX frameworks, and it's super useful when you are working with our native components. It's a special global CSS resource that gets automatically included. To use it, just activate it in the store. Its purpose is simple. It gives you a dedicated place to override or extend styles of native MMX components. So without editing the core files or going into the shadow DOM. So we just learned that the MMX components use the shadow DOM, which encapsulates their internal styles, right? So that means that traditional CSS selectors like .my-class, it won't work unless the component intentionally exposes styling. And so that's what MMX does by exposing specific internal elements via the part attribute. So let's take a look at this example. Well, first, so that lets you style the component from outside the shadow row using the MMX Customization resource. So let's take a look at this one. So this is the MMX hero component. This is what it looks like when you drop it on the page. Using the parts listed above that are available, this is how you can implement the CSS. So all of these parts here are available within the MMX hero. The button is actually located through the slot attribute, but this is how you would call that. You would say : part heading. You have your subheading here. Here's how your button calling the actual class of the button. And so this is how you would do that within the MMX customizations. Now, the MMX customizations is what you would use today. Super powerful, but let's talk about the next evolution of styling in Miva. One that is designed to not just for developers, but for marketers and merchandisers as well. That is the brand new theme editor that will be released in 10.12. Up until now, making visual updates like changing fonts, colors, or button styles, it often required a direct access to a style sheet or writing overrides in the MMX customizations, like we just talked about. While, as a developer, that's a straightforward process. It's definitely not ideal for a marketing person or a store owner who just wants to tweak the headline size or put a little padding around the banner. That's why we're introducing the theme editor. It's a new user-friendly interface for creating and managing your store's design. The theme editor will allow you to define and manage your store's typography, heading, body text, your color palette for primary, secondary, background, whatever you name it, your button styles, your layout, spacing, and utility classes. These are all centrally managed, previewed visually, and can be applied throughout the site with Theme Editor. In the upcoming Miva release, the theme editor will launch with a limited scope. So initially targeting buttons in the current components. So upon upgrade, the store will not be in theme mode for the native components. We are intentionally making it so a store that gets 10.12 applied over their existing store should not see any visual changes on their pages. But good news for developers is you could start using it right away with your own Flex components, and you can update existing components to support theme editor class bindings and the structure. So upon launch, there will be extended documentation on how to implement theme editor into your components. The values will be available in a similar format as the l.settings::instance array. There will also be a way to import the settings via XML so that developers can define and apply custom themes with one simple upload. And you can see some examples of that like I have here. There is a version of Theme Editor already available for our agency partners to try out using the Miva Agency Docker image. If you'd like to get early access and test it locally, just shoot me over an email at developer_support@miva.com, and I'll help you get set up with a Docker license. I have some screen grabs from my Docker store. This image is showing the update of the red button and the red border for what's on the homepage form of the hero banner. And then this image, you can see that the button settings, that it is in theme mode. And if you push that right there, it would go back to the default settings, the default styling for theme mode. All right. We are moving right along. Time for the live demo. Plenty of time for it. In this live demo, I'm just going to be recreating the basic example component that is in the Flex Components repository and talking through each step so we understand it. I encourage you to go to the Flex Components repository and take a look at the example and also the example web component one as well, if you are interested in learning more about the HTML web component functionality within Flex Components. These are the steps that I'm going to go through. Within these 9 steps, we should be able to have a Flex component that we can upload to our store. All right, so let's start off by opening up our folder. As you can see, I've got my example basic folder. I've got my source, my flex.json within my root, and I have my CSS directory with my CSS folder, my JavaScript directory with my JavaScript, my templates with my templates, my init.mvt and instance.mvt. So we're going to start off now, since we have all that created, we're going to start off by just going ahead and defining our component. So we'll have to give it a name, a code, everything like that. So as you can see, the hinter is already giving me some hints on what I should do for these because I have it installed in here already. So we do name. I'm going to copy this first part because it's really easy and it doesn't need much explanation. So you can see that I've got my code, my name, it's a component, it is not the library, and then I have my version type. I'm now going to define the paths for the initialization template and the instant template, and also include the resource group code as well. So that looks like this, where here you've got your recess code, which I'm not going to give that. I'm just going to, oh no, I'm going to leave that. This is going to be example basic resources, and I have my init template, which is in my templates, and my instance template. Finally, I can link up my styles and give them the attributes as well. So here I've got my file path for my styles, my resource group that is going to link up to the resource group that I set above, and then my file path for my JavaScript as well. Those are the basic things that we need to get set up. Now we would need to set up our properties. So we're just going to have one property for this. Let's up here. We're just going to have one property for this, and we're going to first give it a code, and we'll give this text. Next, we will do a prompt, and we will give this display text. And finally, oops, we will give this type. So the type is going to be text because that's all we need. We just need text in there. This is just going to be an example where a text box is on the left-hand side to configure. You put text in there and it'll display on the page. We'll go ahead and we'll add defaults to this as well. So if we go in here and we say defaults, and then so we're going to have to use the code of our property, which is text. And then we are going to say that the value is going to have a predefined value of this is the default text. All right. So that's the basics that you need for a Flex component. You can see that I've got the code, name, type, version. I've got my resource group codes, my initialization template, instance template. I have my styles defined going back to my resource group code. I have my one property. If I wanted more, I would just add them within here. I have my defaults. I don't have any advanced in here, but I could put advanced in here as well. But for now, we're just going to leave it like that. So next up, we're going to build the two templates. So let's first do the init template. Here we'll add the items for CSS and JavaScript using the resource code that we linked up. And so that looks like this. You can see that we have the item with the head name, and then our parameter is CSS with the that's incorrect. It needs to have this. Actually, that is correct. Nope, that's incorrect. And let's change this to this because this is what it should be. All right. So here in our initialization template, we're putting in the CSS and then the JavaScript. Sorry about that. Next, we need to edit our instance template. So our instance template is going to be really simple and easy. We're just going to output that value. And so if you remember, it's part of the instance structure. So it's instance, text, and then value. Finally, you could add styling or JavaScript if you want. We have a class on our instance template called example basic, and you can have that same class and add some styling to the text just so you can see how that works. And then finally, you'll have the JavaScript. For JavaScript, it's just we're going to add a simple console log in here. And the console log will just say that the example basic component has loaded. When that's all done, once you have all of your file set up, we have our 5 parts. We have our flex.json that has all of our default settings and our paths to scripts, our properties, and our default values for our properties. We have our init template that will display the JavaScript and CSS. We have our instance template that displays the values from what the page builder UI is showing. And then we have some basic CSS and JavaScript. So once you get that all done, you can then in your terminal type in the, let me do this so it looks better. tar-cjf, and then the name of the file you want it to be, and then select all the files in there. Oh, sorry. Let me do this from photo. One moment. Come on. There we go. Okay, so now I have the file in my, oops, sorry, in my folder. Now we need to go into our Miva store and display it within our Miva store. So let's go to here. It logged me out. Of course, it logged me out. All right. So I'm sorry, I have to move my screen because it was messed up. All right. So you would go to user interface, flex components. Make sure I don't have this one already in there. I don't. So I'm going to upload my component. I don't have any dependencies added to mine, so I don't need to check this. And mine is not a managed component, so I don't need to check that as well. Dependencies are, you can find out more about that within the documentation, but all that's saying is that if you have this component installed, then it depends on these other components. And all of our MMX components have dependencies. So I'm going to go ahead and find the package here. Let's go to here, open that up, load, and now it should be added down here at the bottom. I go to my content manager, And let's just go to the About Us page. We'll add the basic example component. Oh, I already had it in there. Bad store to do it on. Let's do this. Discard. Let's add it to here and see if it works. Oh, it already existed. I did this already once in mine. Once it's uploaded in there, this is why I shouldn't do live demos. But once it's uploaded in there, you'll be able to have that in there. I don't have another store to test in. For some reason, it wasn't allowing me to do it. But you can see how easy it is to create the component. All that is just creating those things and then having the tar file output at the end. So you can create a flex component from scratch. You can define any sort of editable property. You can add custom styles. You can then package it and deploy it within Miva all in one compressed file. So this is all I have for today. That last part really screwed me up because my store is not working for right now, and I don't have anything else to show as far as uploading it. But please feel free to go to the GitHub repository and download the files. And here's the already tarred up files that you can download and upload to yours, so you can see how it works. So that's all I have for today. Does anyone have any questions or comments? You can put them in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask. Go ahead and fire away.
Yeah, I have a tricky question. So,
Uh-huh.
so when I want to create a model that will be append, customize flex components. So can I do this? So there is a feature like for flex components that I can add flex components through custom model.
So what is, as far as like if you created your own flex component structure, is that what you're
Yeah.
asking? Yeah,
No,
I mean, oh, go ahead.
look, for example, I want to create a store locator model. Yeah, it will have a in admin page like with locations list, and on merchant screen, it will have a flex component. So, but all functionality I want to create through model.
Right. So
I
it
do this.
so like a store locator one. Let's
Yeah,
walk through that. So like you could use like Google API to do
yeah,
something like that. You would
yeah,
create an API key. And essentially all that is that you're going to have different properties, right? Like so in your JavaScript, you're going to get everything ready as far as the HTML element that's going to be rendered on the page. That's where you're going to set all your predefined settings for the map. Like you're going to set a zoom and you're going to set like a latitude and longitude in there so that when it loads, it just has a normal one. And then your properties, you're going to have a group property in there or a list property, which will then, once someone goes in and clicks one of those, then you'll have a new list item where they can add the latitude, the longitude, and then maybe like a name or something like that. And then in your JavaScript, that's where you define all those type of things. So you can use MMX framework for that. Like you don't need you don't need to use the MMX hero or button or text unless you wanted to, but you could use the MMX base, attach that in the initialization template, and then that will give you kind of all of those um, predefined things like the is truthy and creating the element and things like that that you can use. That would be the way that I would suggest it. That way, you can continue to use the MMX base predefined stuff. But if you wanted to create your own, you could do something like that too.
Yeah, but I want to create my own, but I don't want to create. So, for example, I'm installing my custom model, and then I don't want to create custom Flex components. I want that my model will create it.
Gotcha. It'll just create the component for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that's going to do that unless you like build something with like, Node or like some sort of other language that you could then just like have it create flex file. Is that what you're talking about? How to create flex, the instance, all that kind of stuff, and then you just upload it to Miva?
Yeah, but with a model, not through admin panel.
Right.
Yeah.
You cannot upload a flex component through Miva. Um, so you want your own module that you can upload a flex component to? Because like the only way you can upload a module, a flex component is through the admin right now. Now, if the flex component is not managed, you can export the templates, the init template, the instance template, and all the JavaScript using MMT, update it, and then re-upload it through that way. But you can't edit the flex.json file.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or anything? I was while while he was asking, I was uploading the component to my other store, and it's in here now. So here's my example basic, and there's my default text. This is new text. So that's it working. Any other questions or discussion topics? Keep an eye out for theme editor coming in 10.12. It will definitely be a new way for you to create flex components and easily integrate them into your theme of the store using XML and just by pointing and clicking through the admin. It's a really great UI. Thanks everybody for joining. This webinar will be up in the developer docs within the week, and also we'll also announce the next webinar at the end of the week as well. Thanks again.